My name is Hanninen. I graduated in June, and it was really exciting for me because I feel like this is the first time that I ever finished something that was really worthwhile just for me. I currently intern for Golnaz Ashtiani for her brand Ashtiani. She works out of Toronto and out of London. So the theme of my collection was the Antarctic. It's the 100th anniversary of an expedition that went out to the Antarctic, and that didn't go so well, unfortunately. But I was really inspired by the colors in the ice caves in the Antarctic, the ice blues and the teals and cerulean blues. And I decided that it would be a really neat juxtaposition to use that with whites. And I was hunting for fabric for a really long time before I finally realized that it wasn't going to happen on its own. So I quickly and furiously hand-dyed all of my fabric. And so everything that you saw on the runway was hand-dyed by myself. It was a huge undertaking, but it was worth every moment, and it was an experience that I would never give up for anything because I would never have that experience working for anybody else. 1,000 million. Absolutely. It felt like forever because the dyeing wasn't the hard part. The dyeing was something that after experimenting for a couple days, I figured out a way that was really relevant to my collection. So it looked good, it was great. I was like, well, I could cut my pieces and dye them and then cut them out again and it'll work perfectly. The hard part was setting the dye into the fabric because it's white and it's not an easy thing to do. So I ended up having to work with outside contractors in order to do that. So it added a lot of time to my timeline. And that in and of itself was a gigantic challenge, but it was amazing. And yeah, it turned out really, really, really well. I don't deal with a lot of ruffles and a lot of fancy stuff. I like very clean lines. I like things to be very clean finished. I think textiles are very important to a garment. So I think that a lot of my design process comes out of the textiles that I end up using. I don't like to use a lot of synthetics. I like to use a lot of natural fibers. And yeah, pretty much minimal, bared down, and just really crisp, clean, feminine. Well, knitwear was huge because I've always wanted to get into leathers and knitwear, and learning how to manipulate knit fabrics is much, much different. A lot of colleges and universities don't just have like a course that just focuses on knitwear. So I think, especially being in a Canadian climate where like 6 months out of the year we're absolutely freezing to death, knowing how to manipulate and use knits is super, super important. And I would say on top of that, learning like the studio practices is really important because learning to work in a group of people and knowing that you're dependent on somebody else's work for your deadline, and also merchandising, because taking your collection from something that you've made to something that can sit in a store is so much different than just design. You know, it's something that goes into when you design and in the design process, but when you actually have to sell yourself to somebody and tell them why you're so good at something, it's really hard to come up with reasons. So having the ability and the experience behind myself to say, I know my strong points and I know what I'm good at, and being able to sell myself to someone, that was probably the most important course. I think just giving me a broad spectrum of classes and letting me run with it. I think I always kind of had an idea of what my aesthetic was. I don't think anyone goes into school and says like, I don't know what I want my stuff to look like. I think the way that you dress and the way that you present yourself on a daily basis, it's just an extension of that. When you would approach a teacher and say to them, you know, I know that this is the assignment, but I really have a great idea and I really want to do this. And having the teachers get excited with you and tell you to run with the idea and give you the best direction in which to do so successfully. The teachers and their enthusiasm, they were the most important part. Absolutely. Well, I aspire to, I'm not sure whether I want to create my own label, and I'm not sure whether I would love to work with a successful Canadian fashion label, but I really want to work with a company that's ethical, and I want to work with a company that's sustainable and that cares about the environment and that cares about corporate responsibility to their employees, whether they're sitting in their corporate office or whether they're overseas. One of the courses that we took in our last term was based on ethics, and we had to do a lot of exploration as far as where we would manufacture ethically and what our ethical responsibilities were as Canadian designers. And given in the light of what's gone on in the last, even 12 months with the manufacturing facilities overseas collapsing and fires and stuff, I think that's really important, and it's really important to me as a designer because I don't have any visions of grandeur as far as becoming the next Marc Jacobs or anything, but when I present my collections, I want people to know where it's come from, and I want people to know that no one's been exploited as far as, paying someone nothing to create something that's worth, priceless amounts in somebody else's eyes. Canadian-wise, I love Kimberly Newport. Pink Tartan is probably my favorite Canadian fashion brand. Just the lines that they use, and they're clean, but they also use amazing textiles, and I think perfect example of Canada bridging, south towards the United States and really making a name for ourselves. And Alexander Wang. I love what he does with knits. I love what he does with everything. I think his lines are simple, but he uses all this draping, and it's busy, but it's sleek at the same time. And Helmut Lang. I'm actually wearing Helmut Lang right now, and I've looked towards them for inspiration, I think, in most of what I do. I think Helmut Lang in the early 90s is probably as close to my dream label as I could ever get.